Have you ever felt the world stop spinning just for a moment, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what you'd do next? That's how it felt for Elijah, standing on the cracked sidewalk of a street that wasn't made for him. The year was 1968. The war was over, at least for some. But for Elijah, the real battle was just beginning. Welcome to Injustice Browen. I'm Mark Joy, and if you're here, you know this channel is about truth. Raw, unfiltered, and sometimes hard to swallow. If you believe stories like this matter, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what justice means to you. Because today we're stepping into a moment that changed everything for one family. And maybe for all of us. Elijah's hands were steady as he gripped the steering wheel, his wife's hand resting gently on his arm. Their baby girl, Asha, slept in the back seat, her tiny fists curled around a faded stuffed bear. The car was old, but it was theirs. Everything they owned was packed inside, boxes of hope, bags of memories, and a single shining dream. A home. Not just any home, but a house with a yard, a porch, and a future. The kind of place Elijah had promised his wife when he wrote letters from a muddy foxhole halfway around the world. He'd survived bullets, bombs, and the kind of fear that makes a man question if he'll ever see sunrise again. But this was supposed to be the easy part. The neighborhood looked like something out of a magazine. Lawns trimmed to perfection, white fences gleaming in the afternoon sun, American flags fluttering in the breeze. But as Elijah's car rolled down the street, curtains twitched. Faces appeared in windows. A hush fell over the block, as if the world itself was warning him, "You don't belong here." He parked in front of the house, a small two-story place with peeling paint and a crooked mailbox. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Or so he thought. The realtor, a thin man with a nervous smile, waited on the porch, shuffling papers. Elijah stepped out, straightening his jacket, trying to ignore the eyes burning holes in his back. His wife lifted Asha from the car, pressing a kiss to her forehead, whispering words meant to shield her from what was coming. The realtor handed Elijah the keys, his hand trembling just a little. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter," he said, voice too loud, too forced. "Welcome home." Elijah smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. He took the key, cold and heavy in his palm, and walked up the steps. His wife followed, holding Asha close. The neighbors gathered, silent and watchful, a wall of suspicion and fear. Elijah slid the key into the lock, turned it. Nothing. He tried again, harder this time. The lock refused to budge. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The realtor's smile faded. "Maybe try jiggling it," he offered, voice barely above a whisper. Elijah jiggled, twisted, pushed. Still nothing. The neighbors began to murmur, their voices low and sharp. "What's he doing? Is he supposed to be here? I told you this would happen." A car door slammed. Elijah looked up to see a police cruiser pulling up, lights off but presence loud. Two officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts. One of them, a tall man with a hard face, called out, "Is there a problem here?" The realtor stepped forward, stammering, No, just a little trouble with the lock, that's all." The officer's eyes narrowed. "We got a call about a break-in. Someone said there was a suspicious man trying to force his way into this house." Elijah felt the world tilt. He looked down at the key, then at his wife, her eyes wide with fear. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The officer approached, close enough that Elijah could smell the coffee on his breath. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. Proof you belong here." Elijah reached for his wallet, hands shaking now. He pulled out the deed, the mortgage papers, his driver's license. The officer snatched them, flipping through with a frown. The neighbors edged closer, their curiosity turning to something uglier. Elijah's wife clutched Asha tighter, whispering prayers under her breath. The realtor hovered, useless, eyes darting between Elijah and the police. The officer handed back the papers, his face unreadable. "You say you own this house?" Elijah nodded, voice barely steady. "Yes, sir. I served my country. I saved for years. This is my home." The officer looked at the key, then at the lock. "Well, it doesn't seem to want to let you in." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Elijah's cheeks burned. He tried again, forcing the key, willing the door to open, to give him the dignity he'd earned. But the lock held firm, stubborn as the world around him. Minutes stretched into hours. The sun dipped lower, shadows growing long. The police finally left, satisfied there was no crime, at least not the kind they cared about. The neighbors drifted away, some shaking their heads, others smirking. The realtor made excuses, promising to get it sorted out, but his words rang hollow. Elijah sat on the porch, the useless key digging into his palm. His wife sat beside him, silent tears tracing lines down her cheeks. Asha cried, her small voice echoing in the empty street. Elijah stared at the door that wouldn't open, the house that wouldn't welcome him, the dream that felt further away than ever. He wondered how many times a man could be told he didn't belong before he started to believe it. But even as the sky darkened and the world grew cold, Elijah held on to the key. He pressed it to his chest, a silent promise to his family, to himself. They would not be turned away. Not tonight. Not ever. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Time has a way of wearing a man down, not all at once, but in slow, grinding inches. For Elijah, the days after that first humiliation on the porch bled into years, each one marked by a new bruise, a new reminder that the world outside their door was not built for people like them. The house, once a beacon of hope, became a fortress, walls to keep out the cold, the stares, the whispers. But the world always found a way in. The lock was fixed eventually. The realtor sent a man who barely looked Elijah in the eye, muttering about old hardware and wrong keys. But the damage was done. The neighbors never forgot that first day. Some crossed the street when they saw Elijah coming. Others left notes on the porch, unsigned, full of warnings and threats. The mail was sometimes missing. The trash cans were knocked over. The word "go home" was scratched into the paint of their front door, as if the house itself was rejecting them. Elijah worked 2 jobs, one at the factory, another cleaning offices at night. He left before sunrise, came home after dark, his hands raw and his back aching. He never complained, not out loud. But Asha saw the way he stared at the floor when the bills piled up, the way he flinched when the phone rang, always expecting bad news. His wife, Miriam, tried to hold the family together. She cooked, cleaned, and sang lullabies to Asha, her voice soft and tired. But the stress ate at her, slow and silent. She started coughing, first in the mornings, then all day. The doctors said it was nerves, maybe asthma, maybe something worse. But they never looked too hard. They never asked too many questions. Redlining was a word Elijah learned the hard way. He'd walk into the bank, hat in hand, papers ready, and watch the manager's smile fade as soon as he saw Elijah's face. "We're sorry, Mr. Carter, but we can't approve your loan at this time." No matter how much he saved, no matter how hard he worked, the answer was always the same. The neighborhood was not a good fit. The interest rates were higher. The insurance was more expensive. The message was clear. You can live here, but you'll never belong. Asha grew up in the shadow of that house, watching her father shrink a little more each year. She saw the way the neighbors' children looked at her, the way teachers called her articulate, as if it was a surprise. She learned to keep her head down, to smile politely, to never give anyone a reason to call the police. But inside, she burned with questions. Why did her mother cry at night? Why did her father keep the key to the house on a chain around his neck, touching it like a talisman? Why did everything feel so heavy, so hard? The key became a symbol, not just of the house, but of everything they'd fought for. Elijah wore it every day, tucked under his shirt, close to his heart. Sometimes late at night, Asha would find him sitting at the kitchen table, the key in his hand, staring at it as if it might unlock something more than just a door. She wanted to ask him what he was thinking, but the words never came. There was a distance between them, a silence filled with all the things they couldn't say. Miriam's health got worse. The doctors prescribed pills, but they didn't help. She grew thin, her laughter fading to a whisper. Elijah tried to be strong, but the weight of it all pressed down on him. He started talking less, moving slower. The house felt colder, the walls closing in. Asha watched her parents drift apart, each lost in their own pain. At school, Asha learned about the American dream. She listened as teachers talked about hard work, opportunity, and fairness. She wanted to believe it was true, but every night she saw the truth written on her father's face. The dream was real for some, but for her family, it was always just out of reach. One evening, as the sun set behind the house, Elijah sat on the porch, the key dangling from his neck. Asha joined him, sitting quietly by his side. They watched the world go by, neighbors walking dogs, children riding bikes, laughter drifting from open windows. None of it belonged to them. Not really. Elijah turned the key over in his hand, the metal worn smooth from years of holding on. He looked at Asha, his eyes tired but still fierce. "This key," he said, voice low. "It's more than just a piece of metal. It's a promise. I won't let them take that from us." Asha nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that one day the world would see them for who they were, not intruders, not threats, but a family just trying to live. But for now, the key was heavy. The house was heavy. The world was heavy. And all they could do was hold on and hope that someday the weight would lift. It was a night like any other, the kind where the world feels quiet and small, and the only sound is the hum of streetlights and the distant bark of a dog. Elijah sat at the kitchen table, the key resting on his chest, the weight of the day pressing down on his shoulders. Miriam slept fitfully in the next room, her breathing shallow. Asha, now a teenager, was finishing homework at the table, her pencil tapping out a restless rhythm. The world outside their window felt unchanged, but something was about to break. A scream shattered the silence. It was sharp, desperate, the kind of sound that makes your heart stop before your mind can catch up. Elijah was on his feet before he knew it, the old soldier in him snapping awake. He ran to the window and saw orange light flickering against the night sky. The house next door, the one with the white picket fence and the family who never spoke more than a word to them, was on fire. Flames licked at the windows, smoke pouring out in thick, choking waves. Asha's eyes were wide with fear. "Daddy, what's happening?" Elijah didn't answer. He was already moving, grabbing his coat, shoving his feet into boots. He heard the neighbors shouting, saw them gathered on the lawn, frozen in panic. Someone screamed, "The kids! The kids are still inside!" Elijah didn't hesitate. He ran across the yard, the grass slick with dew, the heat of the fire hitting him like a wall. He could see the children's faces in the upstairs window, pale and terrified, banging on the glass. He didn't think about the years of cold shoulders, the slurs whispered behind his back, the way they'd looked at his family like they were something to be feared. All he saw were children, trapped and helpless. He kicked in the front door, smoke billowing out, the roar of the fire deafening. He found the stairs by memory, stumbling through the darkness, calling out for the kids. He found them huddled in a bedroom, coughing, eyes wide with terror. He scooped them up, one under each arm, and carried them down the stairs, the flames licking at his heels. Outside, the neighbors gasped as Elijah emerged from the smoke, the children clinging to him. Their mother collapsed in relief, sobbing, clutching her kids to her chest. The fire trucks arrived, sirens wailing, lights flashing red and blue across the street. The firefighters rushed in, dousing the flames, but the worst was over. Elijah stood on the lawn, coughing, his face streaked with soot, the key still hanging from his neck. The media showed up, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. But when the story hit the news, Elijah's name was barely mentioned. The headlines read, "Local family saved from blaze," but the hero was just a neighbor. The cameras focused on the White family, their tears, their gratitude. Elijah's face was a blur in the background, a footnote in his own story. The next day, the neighbors came by, awkward and stiff, to thank him. They brought casseroles and cards, their words careful, their eyes never quite meeting his. Some of them seemed embarrassed, others just relieved that the crisis was over. But the old suspicions lingered. The stares didn't stop. The distance between their houses felt wider than ever. Asha watched it all with a growing sense of rage. She saw the way her father was treated, the way his courage was ignored, his humanity overlooked. She saw the hypocrisy in the way the neighborhood closed ranks, grateful for his bravery, but unwilling to let him in. At school, she started to speak up. When teachers glossed over the civil rights movement, she raised her hand. When classmates made jokes about those people, she called them out. Her voice was steady, her eyes fierce. She refused to let the world pretend her father didn't matter. Elijah noticed the change in her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the way she carried herself taller, prouder. He worried for her, knowing how the world could punish a black girl who spoke too loudly, who refused to shrink. But he was proud, too. Proud that she hadn't let the world make her small. That night after the fire trucks had gone and the street was quiet again, Elijah and Asha sat on the porch. The key lay between them, glinting in the moonlight. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of their breathing, steady and strong. In that silence, something shifted. The world hadn't changed. Not really. But they had. And that was enough for now. Years rolled on, and the world outside their door changed in ways both big and small. The houses aged, the faces on the block shifted, but some things stayed the same. Elijah's hair turned silver, his steps grew slower, but he still wore the key around his neck, a quiet reminder of every door that had ever been slammed in his face. Asha grew into a young woman, sharp-eyed and restless, carrying the weight of her family's story in her bones. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through boxes in the attic, Asha stumbled on a battered folder wedged between old tax returns and yellowed photographs. She opened it, expecting nothing more than forgotten bills. But what she found made her breath catch. Letters from banks, all stamped with the same cold rejection. Mortgage applications denied, not for lack of money or credit, but for reasons that were never spelled out. There were maps, too, lines drawn in red ink, circling neighborhoods, marking who could buy and who could not. And there, in the margins, were notes in a stranger's hand, not recommended for coloreds, high risk, unfavorable. Asha sat on the attic floor, the rain drumming on the roof above her, and felt a surge of anger so sharp it made her hands shake. This wasn't just her family's pain. This was a system, a machine built to keep people like them out, to grind them down, to make them grateful for scraps. She thought of her father, the way he'd carried that key all these years, the way he'd swallowed his pride again and again. She thought of her mother, worn thin by worry, her laughter stolen by a world that never let her rest. Asha knew she couldn't let it go. Not this time. She gathered the letters, the maps, the evidence, and took them to a lawyer. A black woman named Ms. Daniels, whose office was lined with books and framed photos of clients who'd refused to be silent. Ms. Daniels listened, her face grave, her eyes bright with understanding. "You have a case," she said, her voice steady. "And you have a story the city needs to hear." The lawsuit was filed. The news spread fast. Some people called Asha brave, others called her trouble. The city braced itself, old wounds reopening, old fears rising to the surface. Reporters called, neighbors whispered, and the courthouse steps filled with faces. Some hopeful, some angry, all watching to see what would happen next. Elijah watched it all from the porch, the key still warm against his chest. He was proud, but he was scared too. He knew what happened to people who made too much noise, who demanded too much. But when he saw Asha stand up in court, her back straight, her voice clear and unwavering, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. The trial was long and ugly. Lawyers for the city tried to twist the facts, to paint Elijah's family as ungrateful, as outsiders who should have been content with what they had. But Asha wouldn't let them rewrite the story. She read the letters aloud, her voice shaking with anger and grief. She showed the maps, the red lines that had shaped her childhood, the rules that had kept her family on the outside looking in. She spoke of her mother's illness, her father's silence, the way the world had tried to make them small. People listened, some for the first time. The courtroom was packed. Black families who'd lived the same story, white neighbors who'd never bothered to ask, city officials who shifted in their seats, uncomfortable under the weight of the truth. The judge listened too, his face unreadable, his gavel heavy in his hand. When the verdict came, it was bittersweet. The city was ordered to pay a settlement, to acknowledge the harm done, to promise change. There were headlines, interviews, promises of reform. But the scars remained, on the house, on the family, on the city itself. Money couldn't buy back the years lost, the dreams deferred, the laughter stolen. After the trial, Asha found Elijah sitting on the porch, the key in his hand. She sat beside him, the silence between them full of everything they'd survived. Elijah pressed the key into her palm, his hand trembling. "You did what I couldn't," he said, his voice thick with pride and sorrow. "You made them see us." Asha closed her fingers around the key, feeling its weight, its history. It was no longer just a symbol of what they'd been denied. It was proof that they had endured, that they had fought back, that they had survived. The world hadn't given them a place. They'd carved one out, inch by inch, with every act of courage, every refusal to be silent. The city moved on, as cities do. But for Elijah and Asha, the fight had changed them. The key was still heavy, but now it was a badge of survival, a reminder that even the smallest act of defiance could open doors that had been locked for generations. And as the sun set over the old house, Asha knew the story wasn't over. Not for her, not for her family, not for anyone still waiting for the world to see them as they truly are. The years have a way of softening sharp edges, but some memories never fade. The old house still stands, its paint a little brighter, the porch repaired, the garden blooming with wildflowers that Asha's children planted themselves. The neighborhood is different now. Faces of every shade, laughter spilling from open windows, children racing down the sidewalk without fear. The world outside has changed, but the story of what it took to get here lives on in every brick, every blade of grass, every breath of summer air. Asha stands on the porch, her children gathered around her, their eyes wide with curiosity and trust. She holds the key in her hand, the metal worn smooth by decades of hope and heartbreak. The sun is warm on her face, and for a moment, she closes her eyes and remembers. Her father's steady hands, her mother's gentle voice, the weight of silence, the sting of injustice, the nights spent wondering if things would ever get better. She kneels down, her children pressing close, and begins to tell them the story. She tells them about their grandfather, Elijah, a man who came home from war believing in the promise of a country that never quite believed in him. She tells them about the day the door wouldn't open, about the neighbors who watched and whispered, about the police who made him prove he belonged in a place he'd worked his whole life to reach. She tells them about the key, how it became more than just a way into a house. It became a symbol of everything they'd been denied and everything they refused to give up. Her children listen, their faces serious, their hands finding hers. She tells them about the years that followed, about the quiet strength it took to stay, to keep going, to hold on to dignity when the world tried to take it away. She tells them about their grandmother, Miriam, whose love held the family together even as her health faded, who taught Asha to sing through sorrow and to find beauty in small things. She tells them about the fire next door, about the night their grandfather ran into the flames to save children who'd never spoken his name, and how the world tried to erase his courage, to pretend it never happened. She tells them about the attic, the letters, the maps, the red lines drawn by hands that never wanted them to belong. She tells them about the courtroom, about standing up and speaking the truth, about the fear and the pride and the bittersweet taste of victory. She tells them that justice is never given. It's fought for over and over by people who refuse to be silent, by families who refuse to disappear. Asha's voice is steady, but her eyes shine with tears she doesn't try to hide. She wants her children to know the cost of what they have, to understand that every open door was once locked, that every welcome was once a warning. She wants them to know that their story didn't begin with pain, but with love. A love strong enough to survive anything, even a world that tried to keep it out. She looks out at the street, at the neighbors waving from their porches, at the children playing together in the yard. She sees the change, the slow, stubborn progress that her father never stopped believing in. She feels pride, not just in what her family endured, but in what they built. A home, a legacy, a future. Asha turns to her daughter, the youngest, whose eyes are bright with questions. She presses the key into her small hand, closing her fingers around it. "This is yours now," she says softly. "Not just the house, but the story, the fight, the hope. You carry it with you wherever you go, and when you see a door that won't open, you remember. You have the right to walk through. You have the right to be here." Her daughter nods, the key clutched tight, sunlight glinting off the metal. The door behind them stands open, the house filled with light and laughter, the air sweet with the promise of new beginnings. Asha stands, her children at her side, and looks out at the world with clear eyes and an open heart. She turns to you, the listener, and asks you to remember. Remember the cost of justice. Remember the power of memory. Remember that every step forward is built on the courage of those who came before. She asks you to look at your own life, your own doors, your own keys. She asks you to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep telling the stories that matter. Because the fight isn't over. The work isn't done. But the door is open now, and sunlight is streaming in. And that, for today, is enough. Act 5. The Open Door. Emotional tone, healing, pride, reflection, inspiration. Years later, Asha stands on the same porch, now with her own children. The neighbor.